the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, time travel washing machine that replaces dirty clothes with their clean versions from back in time, outlawed by Twitter and Facebook, just because. Plus, we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we have an interview with Eric Flint, Gorg Huff, and Paula Goodlett discussing the Macedonian Hazard. This is a follow-up book to the Alexander Inheritance, and it takes place in the same basic universe as Eric Flint's alternate history Ring of Fire series. But in this timeline, an enormous cruise ship has been thrown back in time to the Mediterranean in the period just after the death of Alexander the Great. There are some fascinating uptime and downtime characters and stories, and Eric, Gorg, and Paula will tell us all about it. And we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. To honor the publication of the Macedonian Hazard, Baen eBooks has big discounts this month on several Eric Flint time-twisting series. This month, we have $2 off the Alexander Inheritance by Eric Flint, Gorg Huff, and Paula Goodlett. This is the prequel to the Macedonian Hazard. Plus, we have $1 off Time Spike, which is part of the series, by Eric Flint and Marilyn Kosmatska. And we have January discounts on the complete Arcane America series, co-created by Eric Flint. $2 off Council of Fire by Eric Flint and Walter H. Hunt. And $1 off Uncharted by Kevin J. Anderson and Sarah A. Hoyt, and Caller of Lightning by Peter J. Wax and Eitan Colin. It's the Twisted Time January ebook sale. These discounts apply wherever Baen ebooks are sold. Hey, the January e-arcs are here. Now, an e-arc is the snap in the leg crease of a newly ironed pair of pants when you use one of those fancy non-Euclidean irons from the fancy shops. No, an e-arc is not that. An e-arc is an electronic advanced reader copy of a book. It's an ebook version of the galleys, and we will sell it to you in all its unproofread glory, but months in advance. So you can get your favorite series or try a new author long before all of the masses can get it themselves. We offer you the chance to be the mass at the start of the critical reaction, as it were. Anyway, out now in e-arc is Rich Man's Sky by Will McCarthy. When billionaires control the space program, where does that leave the rest of us? Space, a tycoon's playground. The dreams of a handful of trillionaires dictate the future of humanity. Now an international team of elite military women masquerading as space colonists are set to infiltrate and neutralize the largest and most dangerous project in human history. And now out in e-arc is 1636 Calabar's War, Break the Chains of Cruel Dominion. Domingo Fernandes Calabar started out as a military advisor for the Portuguese in Brazil, but now he's working for the Dutch to strike at Portuguese and Spanish interests on land and sea. But when bitter personal enemies put Calabar's family in chains, he has a choice to make: help the Dutch and end slavery in time, or save his wife and children now. Ultimately, this is not just Calabar's fight, this is Calabar's war. 1636 Calabar's War by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon, and Rich Man's Sky by Will McCarthy are now available exclusively at Baen.com as e-arcs, so check them out. Hey, I want to welcome Eric Flint, Paula Goodlett, and Gorg Huff to the podcast. Hi, folks.
Hi.
Hi.
We can talk a little bit about it. Eric Flint is a Hi, Eric. Eric Flint is a modern master of alternate history fiction and science fiction and fantasy. With the 3 million plus books in print, he's the author and creator of the multiple New York Times bestselling Ring of Fire series, starting with the first novel, 1632, and umpteen million after that explore this amazing concept he came up with. And also the Queen of the Seas subseries, I believe, is what we're calling the one we're going to talk about. That includes the Alexandria inheritance in the book we're going to talk about soon. He's also the co-author of numerous science fiction fantasy books and series, including some in the Honorverse with David Weber, those Crown of Slave books, and a whole lot of other stuff. Paula Goodlett retired. Eric I always like to add that he was a labor union activist and lives near Chicago, just to make sure that we put the salt in Eric's personality for all these. So, Paula Goodlett retired from the military as a non-commissioned officer in the early 90s. She began as a special assistant to Eric at the 1632 website. I should mention, if nobody knows, there's this huge community of people who write within the Ring of Fire universe. And you can find that at 1632.org. She eventually wrote an important sequence of the storyline of 1634, the Ram Rebellion. She's the editor of the Grantville Gazettes, several of them, and chairs the 1632 editorial board. Additionally, Paula is assistant editor of the e-zine, Jim Bain's Universe. Well, are you putting that out? Was, yes, okay. Paula mainly at the moment writes in tandem with Gorg, and Gorg Huff is a Texas citizen who has moved to points north. He enthusiastically helped in researching in 1632 series backgrounds, then wrote numerous stories for the Grantville Gazettes and contributed maps and drawings for the Bavarian Crisis, and teamed up with Paula, and you guys started writing 1632 novels that are, I think, very delightful. All of your and Eric and you two's collaborations have a lightness and wonderfulness to the prose. You guys are really, you did the Kremlin games, right? And yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Games and Vulgar Rules, Viennese Waltz, and
we've got another series we published through Ring of Fire Press, Demons of Paris and Demons of Constantinople, and we got a third book underway.
Well, out now. Look, go ahead, Gorg. You want
to? Then we've also, Paul and I also have the Star Wings series, which is a space opera that includes Pandora's Crew, Arachne's Web, and the Rat Rebellion, and it is trade ships, war, revolution, and deep space combat in the Pamplona sector of the explored galaxy.
Is that available at Ring of Fire from Ring of Fire Press?
That's available from Ring of Fire Press.
So we have it on the Bain website. Is for
you've got Pandora's Crew. Yeah, actually, I think you've got all three of them available on the Bain website. Excellent. There's also the Warspell series, which I'm not sure how many you've got because I haven't caught up. I think you've got the Vampirus of Londinium, but I'm not sure if you've got the original Merge World or the other one or Space Race. No, I think you've got Space Race.
Space Race just came out.
Space Race just came out, so you probably don't have that. I need to put that up on your site because I'm running behind. And then there's Lieutenant Teasdale, which Eric just bought, which is basically a female hornblower in a magic world.
No, nobody's ever tried to adapt Hornblower into a female science fiction character before.
Wait,
they have.
Not really.
All right. Out now at booksellers everywhere is this, The Macedonian Hazard by Eric Flint, Gorg Huff, and Paula Goodlett. We have on the cover that it's a Ring of Fire novel because it's all right. You're gonna maybe let's dive into it. Why is it a Ring of Fire novel? or related novel.
For a couple of reasons.
Let's see. We find ourselves in 400 BC, which is not 1632. What has happened? Where are we? Set up this this world for us.
Okay.
Well, the way it got started was years ago. A number of us, Paula and I, and I think you were both on that cruise. I'm pretty
Yep.
sure you were. A number of other people back to around 1632, you know, she wound up on a cruise in the Caribbean, and I can't remember why. But I've sort of forgotten what the occasion was. But anyway, we're on this cruise ship, and we docked. It was in the Bahamas, so it's probably one of Shahid Mahmoud's training sessions. Probably, I think that's what it was. Shahid is the publisher of Art Manor books, and for a while he was doing a it's called The Sail to Success. It was a writing seminar that was done on a cruise ship to the Bahamas. Anyway, we wound up and we had one day to kill on this one island where we rented a great big tent, and we just wound up talking. And I had the idea for a while that a cruise ship would make a really nifty venue for some kind of altered history story. The problem I had was figuring out how you'd keep the ship going. And what happened was some of the people there, Rick, Boatwright, Waltboys, knew more about technical stuff than I do. And what they pointed out was that very soon, it hasn't happened yet, but we're on the verge of it. These kind of ships are going to start having what they call flex fuel engines, where they can pretty much burn almost anything. You know, petroleum will burn best, but you can burn
Alcohol, other fuel sources.
Yeah. And once you got that, then you could have a cruise ship that you could keep it running for a very long time, not forever, obviously, but for a very long time. So that's where the idea came from. And then we kicked around that day basic ideas for the plot. And when we got back, the three of us were going to be the ones who did the writing. And we started developing a plot. And what came out of that was the first novel in the series, The Alexander Inheritance. And the reason for the title is that the setting, the cruise ship is transposed in time and place about 2 years after the death of Alexander the Great. And this is an era in history known to historians as the age of the Diadochi, which is a Greek word meaning successors. And it was the period lasted about 50 years after the death of Alexander. And it was a period of history that kind of makes Game of Thrones look pretty tame. By the time, because Alexander had no established heir. So by the time it was all over, every single member of Alexander's family had been murdered. And of the roughly 50 generals who started the fighting, 3 of them wound up coming out on top at the end: Ptolemy, Seleucus, and blanking word, the guy in Macedonia.
Cassander?
I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Cassandra? Yeah. In any event, 3 of them survived. And it was really makes for a great period to write the kind of stories we write. So just to finish, what I found particularly intriguing and attractive about the story was that we could not have anything like a 1632 plot line because the situation is so completely different. In 1632, you transpose an entire town with its resources. And in the Alexander hands, you transplant a ship that actually had more people in it than the town of Granville. But for anybody who's ever been on a cruise, huge percentage of them are old, elderly. They often know a lot, but they're creaky. On the other hand, the crew tends to be very young, but the crew is also multinational. I mean, you'll find people from all over the world there. So it wasn't the kind of thing where you could have the same sort of political military solution that they were able to adopt in the 1632 universe. We had to come up with something completely different, and which we did. And Macedonian Hazard is the second book in the series. And there will be for sure at least one more, because there is a very bad fellow at the end of this book who needs his just desserts. Now, whether we will go beyond another book, I just don't know yet. We haven't really, we all have other things we're working on, so we haven't really. Macedonia just came out, so we haven't really started.
Yeah. Well, I really would like to see you guys explore Republican Rome. So we would.
Yeah, that would be. We are in the early period of Rome, when the Romans are basically considered by everybody a bunch of semi-literate barbarians. So yeah, that would be one way to go. And the Romans haven't figured much so far in the series. It's mostly focused in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Well, all right. The book starts in Trinidad, not in the Mediterranean, and it starts with Stella Williams. What's her last name?
I made it up, but I don't remember it.
I've got it. Anyway,
I don't remember either, because she's the character that Paula.
Why are we? All right,
Basically, Stella is on the cruise to get her group back, but she is sort of stuck, which a lot of the characters are, which makes for a good story. She's got to come up with
Matthew
a way
is the last name. Yeah. Okay.
of remaking her world, which most of the passengers do. I mean, most of the passengers on this cruise ship, aside from the very old who are just going to croak, are going to have to rebuild their world and find new ways of making a living, new occupations. This is a lot, and in this way, it is a lot like the 1632 universe, because there's the potential for thousands of different stories by different authors that just right there in New America. And at the same time, with the introduction of the radio stations and the communications network, you've got an end to, as you mentioned, the Roman Republic, to Alexandria, to Carthage, to other places around the Mediterranean. And you've got all these people who can introduce you to all the whole Europe, all of Europe at that time. So there's a lot of room for a lot of stories.
One of the things that happens in the preceding book, Alexander, is they've got this cruise ship. If anybody who's been on a cruise knows, it's a very peculiar demographics, because the passengers tend to be prosperous, or they couldn't afford to go on it. Tend to be middle-aged or older, although that's less so in the Caribbean than some other cruises. But still, even in a Caribbean cruise, it's you got a lot of retired.
It's not a bunch of teeny boppers.
It's not a bunch of teeny boppers. And what happens is that once they realize what's happened, one of the things they realize is they can't just lug these old folks around. So they find a place where they can create a colony. And what they do, because they've got a ship that can sail it, they go across the Atlantic and they create a colony on the island of Trinidad. And the reason they do that, and this is one way in which there's quite a bit of difference in 1632, the town of Granville gets, in 1632, gets plunked down in the middle of Europe in the middle of the 30 Years' War in the 17th century. This is actually pretty advanced society, whereas we are 3 centuries before the birth of Christ in the New World. And this is pre-Mayan, I think it's even pre-Olmec. I mean, you know, this is.
That's post-Olmec, but pre-Mayan.
Is it post-Olmec? Yeah, okay. So the point being that with the resources they have, they can create a colony on Trinidad that can defend itself. Because there is a native population, but you know, they can defend itself, which they could not do if they tried to create it in Europe. So anyway, that's why it starts in Trinidad, because not the first one, but this one.
Is there also, it strikes me as there's oil there, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's the reason they put it in
That's
Trinidad.
the reason they picked Trinidad. Yeah.
That and the fact that Trinidad's an island, so they've got a certain amount of natural defense.
Right.
Because of the fact that Trinidad is an island with miles of different distance between it and the mainland.
So they can, so the ship can come and get refueled there.
Right.
Yep.
And it can be a base of the political base for the
It
ships.
can be a political base. Also, Trinidad turns out to be sort of like a very early version of OPEC, because they've got these oil wells and now there's suddenly the demand for oil is not just the Queen of the Sea. It's got demand for oil, but you start introducing steamships, which they do in Europe, and all of a sudden, and a steamship works better on oil than it does on coal or wood, because you've got more control over the flame, more control over the heat, more control over the system in general. And it also burns a bit cleaner, so there's not as much ash and less maintenance needed for the ship. So yeah, there's the people on Trinidad with the oil fields in Trinidad, the new American colonies, the biggest part of their income is from the oil fields.
Mm. And there was an oil tender that got thrown back with them, right?
Yeah, there were really 2 ships that came back. There was the cruise ship, but when the time transposition happened, they were actually docked, and they were getting a whole new load of fuel being pumped aboard from a fuel tanker. And so the fuel tanker comes with them. And the reason that's important is that tanker is quite capable of sailing. I mean, it's an ocean-going vessel, so it's capable of sailing across or steaming across the Atlantic. So that gives them actually 2 ships.
Now, I said that there was a political connection, but New Trinidad and the Queen of the Sea are not politically joined at the hip at all.
No.
Oh, they're actually 2 separate. No, they agree when they set up Trinidad that it's an independent colony. It's mostly Americans because of the crew, not the crew, but the passengers. So it's predominantly an American population. The guy who winds up getting himself elected as I've forgotten the title he gave. What
President. He's
president?
the first president of New America.
Al
Wiley. Al Wiley is a congressman from Utah.
Right. He's a congressman from Utah.
We were originally, Paula and I were going to make him a congressman from Georgia, but Eric moved him to Utah. And he is pretty heavily conservative by modern standards. And the captain of the cruise ship, Lars Floden, I think it was, is from Scandinavia and is, by American standards, very liberal. But you put them back in the 3rd century BC, and they're both screaming liberals. They're slightly different, but considering that they both are opposed to chattel slavery, they're crazy liberal by the standards of Europe in the 3rd century BC, and by the standards of the tribes in America, the so-called civil, their opposition to human sacrifice is a crazy liberal notion.
It's crazy. Those crazy heretics.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Knee-jerk bleeding heart liberals. Yeah.
Yeah, who won't let
You
cut
should
people's
not-
hearts
you
out?
should not
this is a
engage
theme
with
that goes through the book a lot, which is that there's just slavery everywhere, and it's economically very difficult to get rid of.
Yeah.
What is so? Let's take it from Stella's point of view. What is
what-
Stella trying to do, and she hooked up with a fellow,
Stella is
Bartholo.
looking to become a glass maker, and she has the knowledge but not the skill. And there's a big difference between having the knowledge of how to do something. I know how to do a lot of stuff, and having the skill. The lack of skill can have consequences. So Stella is forced into something that she would, before the trip, would never have considered. She buys an indentured servant, and they are forced, the colony in Trinidad is essentially enforced to accept the concept of indenture, because that's essentially the only way that they can get the skill base that they need to support their knowledge base. And Stella is an example of that, not the only example.
Yeah, but
the
she
one
doesn't
we
just.
chose
I mean,
to
she
use.
buys a slave and makes him an indentured servant.
Right.
He's
She
been a slave
buys
since he was
slave,
6,
and
right?
He was a slave in Constantinople and was about to be an executed slave in Constantinople. And Stella buys him, and because of the laws, she couldn't buy him as a slave, not that she'd want to, but she buys him as an indentured servant with, I believe, an 8-year contract of indenture that can be decreased by him. She's got to pay him actually a salary. So it's not just like a straight indenture. Aside from the paying off, aside from the price of buying him, she's also got to pay him sort of half his wages as wages, and the other half goes to pay her back for buying his freedom, is the way the contract works. Or at least that's how I remember it. We wrote this book 4 years ago.
And she's and the reason she needs his labor is because she's trying to become a glassmaker.
Right, which she does.
And he is a glass.
And he is a good glass maker. It wasn't his fault that the asshole got in his way and went into the vat of burning of liquid glass. But the asshole was noble and he was a slave, so he was in a great deal of trouble. Basically the only reason he survived is because the ship people offered quite a bit of money for him, and ship people money is very good money because you can buy things with it that you cannot get with any other sort of currency, including machine-made tools from the Queen of the Sea, which have an accuracy and materials that just wasn't available in the 3rd century BC before the Queen of the Sea arrived.
Well, let's talk about the geopolitical situation a little bit. Maybe talk about the character Eumenes and what is he up to? What is going on with that? That's a major portion of the book.
The basic political framework, and this is what, leave aside the colony, the primarily American colony in Trinidad, and that leaves the ship itself, the Queen of the Sea, which has its own, it's making money engaged in trade, but the Queen of the Sea is in a position to do something unique in human history, which is that it can provide people, leaders in particular, political leaders, with an absolutely secure and impregnable place from which they can situate themselves, because it is impossible for anybody at the time to seize the Queen of the Sea.
And we
And
saw that.
sometimes people try it, and it's like,
Yeah. We
oh,
saw
this
that in
is really,
Alexander Inheritance.
I mean, and then when they realize just exactly how much power an enormous cruise ship has, and this is an enormous ship. So the point is that people can come to the ship, and they have to agree to certain provisions, so they're under ship discipline. But they can get themselves a cabin, emperors and kings and whatnot, and they're safe. And a whole bunch of, so it's a place where people can go get refuge, and it makes it possible. It's kind of like a United Nations on the water, except that you really are secure there. And what that enables them to do is try to keep the Alexander's empire from disintegrating, which is what happened in real history. That's what happened. And the opinion of the uptimers, the modern people on the ship, is that whatever problems and injustices the Alexandrian Empire had, and it had plenty, it's still better, way better, in fact, than the sheer chaos and loss of life that was involved in the endless warfare that went on for 50 years during that period. So they're able to stabilize the situation, kind of. I mean, they can't.
I'd say that they do better than that in some ways, Eric. They do better than just stabilizing.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree. Because the other thing, I should also add, the other thing, the Queen of the Sea, is it's also the world's greatest university. And they run it that way too. So all kinds of people, if they can afford it or have someone sponsored, can come aboard the Queen of the Sea and learn. I mean, so it's a combination university, sort of a United Nations, and an impregnable fortress as long as it can stay out in the water, so that nobody can really mess with it. And that's the dynamic that we work with. And it's I enjoy it because it's a completely different dynamic than what you have in the 16th and 17th century. It's just completely different. The heroes have a lot of influence, but they don't have the kind of direct power.
Yeah.
That that they,
and Eumenes, back to Eumenes, Eric.
Why did you pick him out to be sort of our general that we are following?
He's the most attractive. If you look at the real generals, he was Greek, first of all. He was not Macedonian, which made him kind of an outcast. But it also meant that he just, for whatever reason, didn't seem to have the personal ambition that all
He
the
was
other.
an honorable man.
Yeah.
More than any of the rest of them.
Yeah.
Eumenes was deeply and profoundly honorable and dedicated to doing his job and keeping his oath. He did not betray the people who brought him. This is the primary characteristic of Eumenes. And he was the mainstay of basically the Alexandrian Empire and the royal family as long as he lived in real history. And they didn't actually get killed till after Eumenes got defeated. As long as he was out there in the field, they stayed alive. And that's in our history, not in the book. No, it's true in the book too, but Eumenes was that one honest man among the bunch of them. He was not ruled by ambition. He was not ruled by seeking for power. He was loyal and honest in doing his job.
Yeah. Now, his big task in the book, well, he's got several, but one of them is he's trying to take out these other upstarts and the split heirs and everything, but he needs to cross the Strait of Bosphorus.
Yeah.
And the way that y'all work out that he attempts that is really cool. Can you talk about, I don't want to give anything away, but can you talk a little bit about what
Pontoon bridges aren't new to modern standards, but they were very new to that period. Though they did have boats, they did have road foot over boats. And what they did was they had a few extra tricks, and one of them was that they used lighter materials because they knew how to do a composite material. But and I don't want to give away too many things either.
Well, put it this way. All right, so it's like what, 7 football fields across to there, or
yeah, something like that. And that's at the about the narrowest part. That's
and you've got a big old army gathered on the other side trying to stop you if you happen to want to put a bridge across.
Right.
And so
yes, there.
How do you get rid of them?
Have a surprise.
You have a surprise for them.
Mostly built, and the enemy really comes up to the shore to force them back. They get a little surprise that you're going to have to buy the book to find out about.
Indeed. And that's a fun part of the book.
It is.
Yeah, well, there are, and it's true in the 1632 series also, but the technological gap in the 1632 series between 17th century people and modern people is way smaller than it is, more than 2,000 years ago. So there are things that, one of the things that happens in the first book is that the cruise ship, it's not a warship, so they have to improvise everything. But one of the things they're able to do because of the immense power of the engines is they create steam cannons. And
right.
These things are just, the people of the time just
right. The steam cannon isn't practical without something like the engines of a cruise ship or a battleship. It's not practical just that you don't put a pot of boiling water, a kettle of boiling water over a wood fire and get a steam cannon. You've got to have very high pressure steam. And it's actually tremendously easier in other circumstances, tremendously easier to make a black powder cannon than it is to make a steam cannon. But if you happen to have a cruise ship that's already producing massive amounts of steam, and you've got piping systems because you're shipping heat all over the ship, then making a steam cannon becomes a very practical tool. But nobody else can do it, and nobody else can produce it. At this point, even producing cannons is very difficult for anybody outside the ship people. And the ship people includes both the people on the Queen of the Sea and the people on the, what was it? The Reliant?
Yeah, the Reliant.
That's the oil tender.
Yeah.
So,
and that disparity in technology can work both ways too, as our heroes in Trinidad discover when they come into contact with indigenous populations that have poison blowguns.
Yeah.
And they discover, oh wow, because that, they have no defense against the poison. So, or the venom. So
they've got to innovate.
Yeah, it's it's a lot of fun. It really is.
Necessity is the mother of invention, and those blow darts were a bad mother.
Yeah, it's
well, Stella's I mean, that you feel, this woman's in her 60s, I think.
Actually, she's in her late 40s, I think.
Late
40s.
40s.
She's
But I
young.
mean, it's like ancient for this time, and
Yeah.
and she's on the verge of um not being able to make a living and dying if she doesn't want.
Yeah.
There's the stakes are way higher than they are here, and people
yeah.
don't have their, they're trying to figure out how to make diabetes medicine and stuff. Well, all right. So speaking of poison, let's talk about the other big plot. Is a little mystery that's running through the book as well. Tell us about Olympia, who she is, and what the heck is going on with her. She is a freak.
Olympia was Alexander the Great's mother, and she's really a character in history. And I mean, and what happens at the end of the first book, the Alexander inheritance, is that she has to take in a lamb. And at the very end of the book, she arrives at the Queen of the Sea and wants asylum, and her daughter-in-law Roxanne, who is Alexander's widow, tells her new boyfriend, "Don't let her on the ship. That is the most evil person in the whole world. She'll kill us all." And she is, in fact, an extraordinarily skilled, experienced, and talented poisoner. And one of the things that happens is somebody on the ship gets poisoned, and she naturally is the one whom everyone suspects of doing it, which deeply offends her because the person didn't die, and if she'd done it, he'd be dead. But she's a lot of fun. I've got to say that there are a lot of female characters that are really, really, I mean, Eurydice is another one. And these people are quite true to life. I mean, anybody who has any idea that women at a time were shy and retired.
I've got to say something in Olympia's defense. Okay. Somebody's got to defend Olympia, at least a little bit. At the time, the standard of goodness was how tough a bastard are you? That was pretty much the only standard of goodness. There wasn't a lot of how noble are you? Do you care about those weaker than yourself? Basically, the standard of nobility was, are you tough enough to go take somebody else's good? It was from Game of Thrones. It was the iron price that they respected, not the gold price. And Olympia lived in that world. She grew up in that world. To survive as a female in that world, you had to be a crazy bitch. You really did. There was no other way.
She's kind of she's shaman-like in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't think she's a crazy bitch in so much as that she sort of has been taken over by her own conception of herself as sort of a force of nature or something like that.
Yeah.
So
she served the gods.
Is she and the idea that she really believes in the God she worships, and
as much as
it really oppresses, because a lot of the cruise ship things, it's like all this polytheism, they didn't really think that, but they did really think that, right?
Yeah, they did. They believed in their God.
Yeah, back to the crazy bitch part. In our world, it was Olympus who actually murdered Roxanne. So,
and she forced Eurydice to commit suicide in our world.
And killed Philip.
And right.
So yeah, she's basically the one who took out the whole family.
Well, took out a good chunk of it. Eurydice, who's the young, I've forgotten exactly her position in the dynasty.
She's a cousin of the family.
Yeah, that's she's part of it, but one sort of step removed. Anyway, she winds up she's married to Alexander's half brother. He's a half brother, I think, right?
Yeah, he's a half brother.
Yeah, he's a half brother, and he's got mental he's mentally ill, but he's not crazy. He just, he's got problems. And she gets very attached to him. But the thing about Eurydice, and this is true in real history. I mean, she was young. I mean, she was a teenager. She was utterly fearless. I mean, just
Yeah.
she was just kind of a force of nature. This girl was just ferocious. She wound up. It's amazing how much she accomplished. She wound up eventually dying because Olympia. I've forgotten the details of real history, but she got captured. The second she was forced to commit suicide. And the character of Roxanne is a very different kind of woman. Is another major character in the series. That's Alexander's widow. And these are just great characters to work with.
They are. Yeah, they are. These are great characters. They're fun.
And a lot of the male characters are too, but in particular part.
Yeah. Well, the Ptolemy, who's the ruler of Egypt. I guess this is when the Greeks ruled Egypt.
Yeah, actually, that's the beginning of it. Alexander conquered Egypt. Ptolemy was one of his best generals, and was basically put in charge of Egypt by Alexander, and then confirmed in it by the council after Alexander died. And
he's basically got an advisor who he leans on, who is also his girlfriend, right?
Sorry.
Right. She's a professional lady.
Technically, she's a slave.
Well, she started as a slave, but she grew. Actually, she's not a slave anymore.
Yeah.
She is a hetera, which is a professional entertainer. And but she's also, it was the highest rank that a woman could reach. And it was a rank, and it was the only rank that allowed a woman to own her own property and manage her own affairs. And she was actually historically one of Alexander's advisors while he was out conquering the world. She was one of those people that went along with Alexander and gave him advice, gave him counsel while he was conquering the world, along with the rest of the generals. And when the empire started breaking up, Ptolemy, who was very attached to her, had a couple of children by her, and in our history, basically loved her, but had to put her aside for a political marriage. In the new timeline, it's a safe bet that she's going to end up the Queen of Egypt.
In real history, Ptolemy was one of the three successors who came out of it.
Right.
And he founded the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, which ruled for another several hundred years. The last
until Cleopatra.
Yeah, the last Ptolemy was Cleopatra. Yeah.
With Julius Caesar's Cleopatra. They were pretty much all Cleopatras.
Yeah. So it was this kind of Macedonian dynasty that ruled Egypt, is what it amounted to.
So yeah, there are a lot of capable people.
Yeah. So who are the bad guys? The Eumenes is fighting first. There's two really kind of evil fellows.
There were a number of them. We killed off several in the first book, but there are two really big ones in this book. The son, what was his name again, Paula?
Cassander. And then
Cassander is the real snake in the grass sort. It is actually entirely possible that he did, in fact, contribute to the death of Alexander the Great, that he poisoned him with a disease that was carried in the hoof of an animal as a sort of a petri dish, and then put in Alexander's food to make him sick and eventually kill him. And he did that because Alexander hated his whole family. Alexander the Great positively despised, what was Antipater?
Yeah, Antipater was the old man, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Antipater was basically a traitor to Alexander the Great, who'd been left in charge of Macedonia and had done a bunch of things that Alexander had specifically told him not to, and was looking at execution. So he sent his sons, and this is quite possibly what happened in the real world, but nobody can prove it at this late date, one way or the other. Sent his sons to kill Alexander. This did happen in our universe, and may have happened in the real universe. But Cassander is a nasty piece of work. He's all about Cassander and nobody else, perfectly willing to sacrifice his brothers, his father, anybody, and a personal physical coward to go with the rest of it. Whereas the other,
Antigonus One Eye, which who's
as opposed
going down in the next book.
Yeah, as opposed to Antigonus One Eye, who is even nastier, but at least is not a personal physical coward.
Yeah, actually, cowardice was not a common trait. I mean, whatever else you want to say about the time, they typically were not cowards at all. The other bad guy is Antigonus One Eye, who is a real. I mean, he was a real character in history and quite a fascinating guy. And he's a bit different. He's not a snake in the grass. He's just ambitious and very brutal.
More a wild boar.
Yeah. I mean, he's just and he survives the end of this book.
You're going to have to deal with that fellow.
Yeah, he does very bad things at the end of the book.
What?
And readers, I know, because we're getting reactions, are kind of like he needs to get up to the birds, and we will do so.
Once we get a contract to write the next book,
okay,
then we will. Then we will.
That Antigonus One Eye is sitting there in fictional land killing people. We need to get rid of him. So one other aspect of the book, that a big subplot, and one that's I find very fascinating, is what the ship is going to do. What's Lars Flodden and his people? What are they up to? What is their mission going to be? What did they decide in this? I mean, what are some of the things they think about as we get going?
To bring civilization, or at least the opportunity of civilization, to the ancient world, to the whole ancient world. I think that's what I thought they were going to do. What about you, Eric? Uh-oh, I think I froze up.
Your voice is breaking up a little bit.
We're having some slow internet thing going on. Yeah, hold on, just a minute. Maybe it'll correct itself.
Basically, what the Queen of the Sea is trying to do, as much as possible, they're trying to sort of, partly it's their function as a university, not just simply teaching people physics and chemistry and that stuff. I mean, a lot of it is advancing, new ideas of different ideology. And it's not as if people didn't pay attention to this. I mean, don't forget, Aristotle just died. And Plato wasn't that far back. So, I mean, this is a period. It's not that people weren't thinking about or listening to new ideas. And the one great advantage that the Queen of the Sea has, well, first of all, it's in the future, which gives it a lot of prestige, we'll say. But the other thing, and we use this all through the story, is that ship is just goddamn impregnable. I mean, it's as if you kind of have gods of Olympus. I mean, they're not gods, but if you're somebody who's mad at them, well, you can stare at that ship all you want, but you're not going to get to it. And that means they have to keep dealing with it one way or another.
There is a weakness exposed in that it's theoretically, if they try to go around Africa, they could run out of fuel and they need.
Yeah.
And Ptolemy realizes, or at least his advisor realizes this as well.
Yeah, although, yes, you're right. Although they do have another ship. So, I mean, you know, they if worse came to worse, they could probably get around it. But yeah, it would be a real problem. They have to be careful about that. Eventually, they'll have to build more fueling stations because right now they've got Trinidad and they've got, you know, a few others. But even with flex fuel engines, you still need to get some kind of fuel. So yes, you're right. It's
Yeah, so we do, would it be a spoiler if I told about where they put their fueling station?
where they put what?
The fuel station.
Oh no, I don't think so. I mean, you know.
Okay, well, they put a fuel station on Madagascar.
Yeah, Madagascar in this period is not inhabited yet, at least so far as
We know for sure.
anyone's been able to determine. I mean, archaeologists have never been able to find human settlements of Madagascar this early.
So Ptolemy is putting a fuel station at the mouth of the Adriatic Sea, and our guys are putting a fuel station on Madagascar. So those fuel stations there are going to increase the Queen's range, which is going to be a factor in the next book. Now, that's not much of a factor in this book, but it will play a role. It's going to have to play a role in the next book, both in regards to how far they can go and in regards to how things work out for Antigonus One-Eye.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of his security was the fact that they couldn't get all the way around the Horn of Africa with a bunch of extra fuel. But if they've got a fueling station at the mouth of the Adriatic and on Madagascar, that changes things. Adriatic.
And it opens up the Far East.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that they will run into next, it will be India. Because they're already around the Horn of Africa and they're just across the Arabian Sea. And India in this period, I believe the Gupta Empire is already in existence, if I remember. Wait, be the Mauryan Empire probably. But India is already really up and going concern. In fact, Alexander was not able to conquer India. He tried, but you know, he just couldn't do it. It hasn't figured so far in the story, but it's sitting there. China's also up and running. That's pretty far out. You know, the distances involved are pretty huge at this point. But yeah, the Chinese dynasty, the first Chinese dynasty, the Qin dynasty, not quite started yet, but it's on the horizon. And China's already civilized.
Yeah. Well, it's a vast and rich tapestry. Is there anything else we want to say about the book? We haven't.
It was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah. They really are good novels. I mean, honestly, I'm not obviously I have a vested interest in getting people to buy them, but we're proud of these books and we enjoy working on them. And it's a storyline that
And
you find anywhere else. I mean, there's not much overlap with other alternate histories of one kind or another.
And in my opinion, it is as open to other stories and other writers as the 1632 universe is. I really think that. I really think that it's as suitable for having other people come and playing that universe as the 1632 universe is.
Well, it certainly leaves you thinking about all the different possibilities. It opens up an area of your imagination after you finish reading it that you think, well, what could this be and what could that be? It's wonderful stuff. All right. Well, thank you. This is the book. It is called The Macedonian Hazard by Eric Flint, Gorg Huff, and Paula Goodlett. And Eric, Gorg, and Paula, thank you so much for talking with us about it today.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having us.
All right.
Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
System Defense HQ. City of Columbia, Beowulf. Beowulf System. Take that, bastards! Corey McAvoy snarled viciously as the block ship impeller wedges came up. A lot of those freighters weren't going to survive the next few seconds, and he knew it. But they didn't have to survive to do their jobs. And in the meantime, Holman Sanders and Alice Truman had left almost 500 lacs behind when TF-32 headed off to the terminus. Only about half of them were close enough to intervene in the attack, and even they had poor counter-missile solutions by and large. But they also had a lot of CMs and no reason to conserve them, and McAvoy watched them streak across the display, chewing into the Solly missile stream. Their interception angle was bad, coming in from the side rather than the head-on approach, which gave counter-missiles their best intercept percentages. Considering all their disadvantages, they did quite well, but over 700 of the Asta final stages got by them. They tore down upon the block ships, but those block ships had no more investment in their personal survival than SBQ-12 or the Astas themselves. They simply obeyed the remote commands, brought up their wedges, and rolled ship. They weren't perfectly placed, because the damned Sollies had suckered them, and everyone had expected the attack to fall on Cassandra. But the defenders had known the threat axis, and that meant the block ships were in roughly the right spots to form their curved defensive shield wall when McAvoy brought them online, and that there had been no time or way for Liang Tao Rutgers to update his attack missiles profiles to avoid them. At least a dozen of them protected every one of the Asta's targets. 24 of them guarded each of Evaldi's most critical installations and the major habitats, and as they rolled ship, bringing their wedges perpendicular to the Asta's approach, they built a wall in space. Not a single wall, but a series of them. Individual shields, impeller wedges twice as wide as usual as their nodes were ruinously overloaded, stacked in a protective cup around their charges. Now the surviving Astas reached attack range. Their AIs were the most capable any Solarian missile had ever carried. The men and women who'd programmed their attack profiles hadn't anticipated the block ships, but they'd been very clear about what did and did not constitute legitimate targets. The AIs noted that all of those legitimate targets had disappeared, and their vectors altered abruptly as they scattered, dodging wildly in their efforts to avoid the obstacles in their path and reacquire their targets. Most of them failed. Unable to clear the barricading impeller wedges before impact, and precluded from choosing alternate targets by targeting commands designed to avoid strikes on the Beowulf habitats, they didn't even fire on the block ships. They simply rammed into those wedges and disappeared forever. But not all of them did. Corey McAvoy swore viciously as he discovered that roughly the right places wasn't good enough against Asta. His eyes widened incredulously as 6 of them squirmed through a chink around Evaldi of Beowulf's No. 2 nano farm. There was no point defense, no sidewall inside the block ships, and the nano farm simply disintegrated. Entire modules shattered or went spinning off from the vortex of destruction. And then one of the central power plants exploded and wiped the entire platform and all 5,000 workers aboard it from the face of the universe. Nano Farm number 1 took at least one hit of its own, but that was peripheral. The damage was nothing to sneer at, but it should be easily repaired, and it was unlikely to significantly impact the facility's production rate. Far more important to McAvoy at the moment, less than 100 of its personnel were killed. And that was it. Not a single hit got through to the missile production lines. "Well done, everyone," Gabriel Cadell Markham said from McAvoy's comm display. "Well done."
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a nosegay of aspirin tree leaves and acacia nuts and magic uptime sniffles ending Kleenex plus thanks, praise, and gratitude to Eric Flint, Gorg Huff, and Paula Goodlett, authors of The Macedonian Hazard. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.